But this is the Equine Emergency Lecture. If you meant to go somewhere else, it is elsewhere, yeah. But anyway, well, I won't, oh, there it is. I think the first thing is to get this on the right page. There we go. I want to thank our sponsors. BI provided the food, and Covetrus supplied the bandage materials that we'll be using a little bit later. And my wife provided the horse, which we'll be using a little bit later. So all those people we want to thank. BI has also is where we get our vaccines through. So they're preventing a lot of emergencies, because when you get your horses vaccinated, we have less times that they're sick that we have to get to emergency situations. So I really want to say that I'm happy to be here. You've all seen me at different stages from truck to this clinic, and it's been really neat to grow with the community and grow the clinic how the community needs or wants, and just see where it goes. And I think that's kind of where we are with emergencies. We have emergencies, and we have to learn how to adapt to those emergencies as we get different animals and as we get different situations in our lives. So here tonight we'll go through a few examples, and then also probably you're interested in the fact that there's less veterinarians around than there used to be. So we'll kind of talk about that and how that has changed, how you might deal with emergency now versus 10 or 12 years ago. And I think the first thing we need to do is frame emergencies. The first thing we need to do is hit resume slideshow. There we go. Is frame our mind for what
Technology wins again.
yeah, technology wins again. What about now?
Technology emergency.
Is this a non-example of an emergency?
This is not, there we go.
There.
Let's see if it's going back and forth. Oh, look at that. The first thing I want to do is frame what is an emergency, because I think a lot of people don't have maybe a clear idea of what an emergency is. And an emergency is a life-threatening situation that needs to be seen immediately, or really in my mind within 24 hours. Something that you need to take action for, versus urgent care things that need to be seen but more the next available appointment. You know, emergencies, they need action. Urgent is something you need dealt with, but it can wait. It's not something that the animal is dying in front of you or something like that. And really, that's where the client and the vet start working together, because if you aren't sure, that's where you ask us. And that's where our experience and your experience start going together, because you look at some things and you're like, that's not an emergency, you know it. But then other things you're like, I don't know, is this an emergency? So that's where you call us, and then with our experience, we're going to try to help you determine if it's an emergency and how to act. And one thing we have to remember is no one's 100% right. We're all trying to figure this out based off the information you give, based off our experience, and you're coming to us because hopefully with your experience and our experience, we get to the right course of action. But I think one of the things we have to remember is even if we all do everything right and have all the experience in the world, things are still going to die and bad things are going to happen. And you know, I tell people sometimes you shouldn't be an animal in animal work if you can't plan to lose them sometime. Because bad things happen and mistakes will be made by you, mistakes will be made by us, but our experience and working through it together to make sure that we're getting as much of our skills towards that animal as possible in the problem is what is going to keep us from losing more animals and keeping us from making sure we have the best possible results. And we're trained to triage here. So when you give us information, I've trained my staff to hear certain keywords and certain things that are going on, that it's going to tell them, oh, we need to react like this. Whether that be get it in right now, or oh, we can wait a little bit. So that's where we start trying to figure out what is and is an emergency. Some of that is your mindset as well. If you're going to go to work or a ball game or out to the movies before dealing with it, it's not an emergency. And when we hear people say that, and that's things I've heard, I want to go to a ball game, I'm like, okay, but I'm not going to stay late for someone who's going out to do something if they don't feel it's an emergency. So there's some triage involved with that, because we have had people that we've told, you need to deal with this quicker, and they don't respond, and they don't want to come in quicker, and I'm like, but we're telling you this is bad. And then we've had other people that are like, well, I want it dealt with, but I want to go to the ball game first. I'm like, well, then it's not a true emergency. So framing ourselves and yourselves to know that if it's an emergency, it requires action. And I think that's just a very important thing to keep in mind, is if it's like in your head, this is an emergency, be prepared to do stuff. If you get the response, oh, that's not too bad, then you can relax. But still, being prepared and realizing that you're going to have to act is really the next important part. So yeah, the next thing, just to kind of let you know, I'm recording this for our podcast, and I have more information about emergencies on my podcast too. You can find the podcast on Apple Podcast, Google, all of the normal stations, but we also have it on the website and under the projects page, Vet Talk, the veterinary podcast. I have a few episodes about emergencies and clinic changes, and those go into even more depth than what we'll go through tonight about why the veterinary industry is changing and how we are kind of dealing with it here at Licking Valley Vet, and how we're dealing with it as veterinarians as a whole. So listen to those episodes if you're driving around and stuff like that. Got your picture. And really, now let's jump into emergencies. What's the first thing you think you need to do during an emergency? Anyone?
Be calm.
Be calm. That's, I think, the hardest thing for people to do, because when you're in an emergency, your emotions take over, and you hopefully don't have emergencies every day. And once those emotions take over, you're not helping your animal, you're not helping yourself, and we just have to start being calm and taking a step back. Because a lot of times people run up to their horse, it's been hurt, and it's a sweet horse and you love it. You're in the middle of the field, has a big laceration, you start poking around to see what's going on. Well, this horse might be in pain, and if you get kicked in the head, you're not going to be able to help your horse. And we want you to be able to help your horse. So a lot of times, just take a step back. Let the horse calm down so it's not freaking out and not going to react how you don't expect it to. Yet let yourself calm down. Because remember, your horse, probably 1,000 pounds, or if you have a cow, 1,200 pounds, and if it's not calm, you're not probably going to be able to calm it down just by petting it on the side, if it'll let you get that close. So yeah, just be calm, take a few deep breaths, whatever kind of helps you relax a little bit, and assess the situation as a whole. Would you get hurt if you go up? Is your horse in more danger? Where are other people around? Because a lot of times you're checking on your animals all by yourself, and if you rush into something, and like I said, you get stuck or hurt, it might be hours before someone finds you needing help, and on the flip side of that, it might be even more hours before you're conscious again to say, oh my gosh, I'm hurt because my horse was hurt. So just be calm. The other thing that helps us with is, if you're calm, you can talk to us on the phone. We get a lot of people that call us, and they're giving us a lot of words, and they don't realize we are not seeing what is in front of you. All we hear is your words through the phone. And that makes it really hard for us to kind of figure out what's going on and be able to give proper advice for triaging. I think both of you here send pictures. That's a big help, but that's where you take a step back, get calm, take a picture, and then we kind of, can go from there. So a few of the things I'm going to go over tonight is lacerations, eye injuries, colic, dystocia, grain overload, and a few other random things. But again, whenever you're stepping into emergency, you're starting to think right now, oh, what if my horse gets cut? Remember, be calm first, and evaluate the situation before you get hurt or it gets the horse more hurt. So the first thing is eye injuries. If we think about eye injuries, most people say eye injury and they're actually referring to the actual eyelid and the stuff around the eye, the tissue around the eye. And then there's the actual eye itself that can be hurt. So most of the time someone says, oh, the eye has been injured, and they come in and it's actually the tissue around the eye. So realize that might be a slight communication issue. We pretty much know something's going on in that region, so we want to deal with it. But just remember that when vets are hearing eye, they think of the cornea, the globe, the white of your eyes, anything in that area. And that is much more serious than just the tissue around the eye, because this tissue around the eye is meant to protect the eye. So if it's damaged, we know it has done its job. If the eye itself is damaged, that could be very, very serious, because if you lose all these fluids that are in your eye and they deflate, there's not much we can do to fix that. So we get really concerned about that. And it's very hard to tell sometimes which is which, as far as, is it just an injury here or is it an injury on the eye itself? Or it's hard to tell how bad the injury on the eye is. So in general, eye injuries are something I want to see more quickly, because I want to be able to get my eyes on the horse's eyes and make sure that there's not an issue with that we need to deal with immediately. Because some things, when we're treating eyes, we put some salve on it and we're good to go. But eye pictures are really hard. People love sending them to me and I'm like, yeah, just bring it in because I can't tell. It's just really hard to get good pictures of eyes and for me to evaluate as well as we should. So here is a picture of a hurt eye. This, and I said it myself, this is actually the eyelid was hurt because the horse ripped itself on, I believe, one of the buckets on the stall, got stuck. So this is just hanging here. And I'm like, well, that's not good, and I want to see that quickly. Because the quicker I can tie this together or suture this back together, the better it will heal. Why I'm concerned about this is not really from the wound itself. That little bit of tissue there, that's going to be fine. Well, if that falls off, the horse is going to live. That's not life-threatening. But if that tissue falls off, that is not there protecting the eye itself. And that's what we want to do, is protect the eye itself. So I'm worried about the long term here. I'm not worried about the horse dying. What I want to get from this is I want to get that suture together quickly. And I'll talk to you a little bit about how quickly we suture things and want to get things sutured at the next thing when we talk about lacerations. But in general, I want to get this thing seen quickly. Is it something you have to rush out, right now in the next 5 minutes? No, it's something you take a deep breath. You call the vet and say, hey, I've got an eye injury, I need to be seen. That's something I want to see today. But it's not something that if I see you at 9 o'clock or I see you at noon, I'm concerned that we're losing our ability to get this horse healed well.
Very sorry.
So this injury here, from a different angle, you can see it's hanging, and come on, laser light. You can see it's hanging, and we have the ability, there's still some blood supply on it. That's a good thing. Here is after it's sutured up. Now this healed very nicely, and the other nice thing about it was we could then protect the eye underneath, and that's what I wanted to do long term, because if that doesn't heal well, you're getting more air on that eye, you're getting more damage to that eye chronically, And that could cause the ulcers on the eye, that could cause us to have all sorts of problems long term, because that eye can't stay moist and that eye can't stay lubricated. Or if a thorn or bug or dust and debris, a horse's tail gets flinged at that eye, it might not be able to block it as well, and then we keep getting more injury. You'll notice there's some green staining here. What I did before I sutured that together was I stained the eye to make sure there was no damage to the eye itself, because again, that's what I'm worried about, ulcers or getting in deeply to that deeper layers beyond the cornea or the outer layer of the eye. Now you notice in these pictures I am doing these things at a barn. I now have stocks here. I really like doing eye work in stocks because I've sutured a lot of eyes in barns and in the dark and everywhere else. And I was suturing once and I was working on the eye, had the needle. I'd sedate the horse, I put a local block above the eye, and then I twitch the horse, and I have the owner most of the time kind of hold that head steady so the head won't move while I have a very sharp pointy object near the horse's eye that I'm trying to protect. I was suturing once and I was like, the head was wobbling a little bit. I'm like, hold it steady, I'm kind of in it. And then all of a sudden I hear a plop behind me. The owner was a little nervous about blood and needles and had fallen over. When I'm in the stocks here at the clinic, I don't care if you faint. I can pick you up later. So it allows me to get work done and I don't have to worry about a lot of other things. The horse moving around as much. It helps me do a better job. So I'm telling people to haul those things in. This eye is a melting ulcer. That is something I want to get treatment on fairly quickly too. That is something where we get an infection, not actual trauma, and that is going to melt the eye or basically degrade all those proteins in the eye. So what we do is we get a lot of antibiotics and antifungal agents on this thing. That horse can see and it's fine. It has some scarring in its eyes. So there's a section that's blurry, but it can see all around that scarring. But that's something I want to get dealt with quickly because I don't know when that is going to melt right through and get to the inner layers of the eye. So eye things I want to see. But if you come out at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's not something you have to wake me up at night for. It's something, we want to get you in first thing. I don't want to wait a full day. The other caveat with eyes is, I've been dancing around an injury that breaks the eye and all the fluids in the eye deflate. If that happens, I'm probably just going to remove the eye itself. I can't fix that. So, is that an emergency? Yeah, we want to get pain medicine. We don't want the horse suffering, but I can't do much to fix that, and that's something I would usually, even if I saw it at night, I'm going to give it some pain medicines. I'm going to schedule it for the day when I can see things. So yeah, eyes are something you want to get seen. A lot of times just because we want to get things sutured back together and make sure there's not a worse injury. Lacerations, which it goes along with the eye, since a lot of those external eye injuries of the soft tissues are just lacerations, is where we need to kind of talk about how quickly we want to get things together. So everyone's come out and found a bump, a scratch on their horse, and sometimes they're like, oh my gosh, this horse is dying. And sometimes they're like, oh, it's not that bad. You've seen things, you've seen scratches on yourself that you go to the doctor for, and you've seen scratches on yourself that I just need Neosporin. Same thing with horses. This one was obviously something I wanted to get sutured together. So what's the first thing we need to do when we see a horse like this?
Calm down.
Exactly, because that is not how the owner found this. The owner found this one bleeding. It was covered in blood and dirt. So she was calm and she took a deep breath. And the first thing she did was she got a bandage on, which we'll talk about later tonight. That'll be our wet lab. and she stopped the bleeding. She put pressure on it. Just like in the movies, someone's bleeding to death, you put pressure on it. That's very simple, and the movies actually get that right. And that's the first thing you do, stop that bleeding after the horse is calm. Because again, if you touch, that hurt, so if I touch that, that horse react. So you be careful, you stop the bleeding, and then she took a bandage off. She got water and sprayed that off. That's why we have a nice clean image there of something that I can see. She took a picture, sent it to us, called us and said, hey, this just happened, I just found it, I've cleaned it, I stopped the bleeding, I cleaned it up, now what do I do? And I evaluated it and I said, well, we need to get that sutured up. So we went out and we sutured that together and stuff. When you are cleaning, please, please, please don't clean with pepper, don't clean with kerosene or anything else weird. Water is great. Betadine with water is great, but we are not trying to spice this thing. I have tried to get pepper out of wound. There's a lot of, I guess it's an old wives' tale that people are putting pepper on wounds. It's really hard to get out of the wound and it's slowing healing down, and I can't imagine it makes it feel any better than the actual laceration and stuff. Kerosene, again, I see people do this and they're smokers and I'm like, I just don't see this going well. So please don't do that stuff. But yeah, how quickly do we need to get this seen? If you see this and there's a laceration, it's like, oh, okay, well, this needs to be seen. Ideally, if you were in vet school, they're going to tell you, actually you're in vet school, how long do you want to get it seen? Yeah, 8 to 12 hours, because otherwise infection gets in here. It's a harder time to close this wound, because with this wound, as soon as it's cut, the skin is starting to contract. It makes it harder for me to suture back together. But ideally is not really what happens in the real world. In the real world, you get home, it happened 8 or 12 hours ago, you find it and you're like, oh gosh, what do I do? What I found is if I can get it within 24 hours, I'm usually doing okay. If it's over 24 hours, I'm probably not suturing it together. There's too much infection, the wound has probably contracted too much, so I'm going to let that heal by what we call second intention, or just healing together without sutures. So it takes a lot longer, and depending on the region, it leaves a lot more area that can be damaged, because what the skin's doing is protecting sensitive regions too. So again, I want to get that seen, but after we stop the bleeding, you know, we have time to take a deep breath, get in here, get things done. One of the other things that, and we'll talk about a little bit more later, but I had one person once, there was a laceration on the hoof, or in the collateral area of the hoof here, the collateral cartilages, and every time the horse would stand up, it would start bleeding. And the owner kept picking it up, and they're like, my horse keeps bleeding whenever it stands. And I said, well, or whenever it picks its foot up. I was like, well, leave the foot down. And it eventually stopped the bleeding. Again, they were not being calm, they weren't thinking about the situation. So if you take a step back and you see that it's not bleeding in a certain position, get that horse in that position. If the sad thing is, if there's something that's bleeding enough to kill the horse, you probably won't be able to do anything about it, because it'll bleed out too quickly. Even if I'm running out there, even if you're hauling it in, probably take 30 or 45 minutes. If it's that big of a bleed, the horse has bled out before we can do anything. So here's an example of a big wound. This horse ran into some sort of wooden thing. What you see right here is bone. This horse destroyed the tissue on it and had multiple fractures in its skull. Let's see, here's the second one up at the top of its head. We had fractures, bigger fractures up here. I removed some bone pieces, and of course the skin was ripped up. So what do you think's going on right here? People were freaking out, and they had to get here quickly. And I think it was good. I mean, multiple fractures on a head, wood sticking out of this horse, and these big lacerations. But the blood actually wasn't that much, so we weren't hemorrhaging out. We needed to get it dealt with. We got it dealt with quickly. One of the things around here, we have Lexington right here, and so many people, well, I'll say an hour and 10 minutes south, so many people want to just run straight to Lexington. As they see this, multiple fractures on a horse, multiple lacerations, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is horrible, we have to go down to a specialist. And it would have been a wasted trip, but we got that taken care of right here. One thing where I want you to be calm and talk to a vet about is to save you time too, because if you can run down to Lexington, they're going to be able to handle this just as well, but no offense, it's going to be more expensive, and it's a farther trip for you and the horse. And we're right here. We brought this one in. Oops, sorry. Too fast. This was the top wound. We got sutured up. We left a drain in there to make sure infection didn't get built up in there. We removed the drain in a few days. And then we put some silver spray. That was the bottom wound after we sutured it up. A little out of order there, but and then this horse really did very good. Healed up. We got the drain out, and they saved time. The horse was less stressed, driving around less places, and it's something we dealt with here. It was a cool case for me. I hadn't seen that many fractures in a horse's skull before, but as far as emergency and triage, it was, I'm suturing wounds together. I'm doing basic stuff. So yes, there are things that need specialists, there are things that need more advanced care, but again with the triage, I'm here to tell you when you need that. You don't have to go all over the world if we can handle it here. So just kind of remember that if you're freaking out, doesn't necessarily mean I'm freaking out. So another thing everyone's worried about, colic. So what signs, have you all seen colic in horses? What are the signs you remember seeing?
Rolling, pawing, sweating.
Okay, yeah, you just got the first,
Tummy
yeah. Yeah, all these things, no gut sounds if you're listening. Grinding teeth is one that I hear as well. This is like every horse person's worst nightmare, that and laminitis. And colic can be a true emergency. There are two types of colics, a medical colic and a surgical colic. Surgery, you have to go to surgery to fix. Medical, you can fix with various medical treatments, drugs and fluids and things of that nature. So how do we handle a colic? Well, the first thing I'm telling people to do is hook up the trailer. And why is that so important? A lot of colics are gas colics. If you can shake that colic or shake that gas loose, it might resolve the colic. Sometimes a trailer ride will do that. So I tell people if their horse is colicking, first thing you do, get the trailer hooked up. You may not